I'm sorry, Xeno fans. Ever since I started playing Kuro 2, the brain rot has been flowing, so I think we might need to start making regular Trails content on the channel. This is probably going to make it so that the videos for my actual target audience of Xeno fans are going to get deboosted in the algorithm because no one cares about Trails, so I'm probably killing my own channel with this, but it's what I want to do, so oh well. As for this video itself, it is only going to rely on direct plot spoilers through Cold Steel 4. However, I'm going to need to discuss a bonding conversation in very broad strokes from Kuro 2 or Daybreak 2, and I'm going to need to talk about some new world building details that are only introduced in the Calvard arc. So if you don't want that, don't watch the video, but if you do have a PC, Daybreak 1 and 2 are completely playable in English right now, and I would highly recommend doing that. You deserve to experience Peak no Kiseki right now instead of having to wait at least another year. Also, I hope you don't mind there not being a lot of relevant cutscenes here. Like, in addition to the Calvard arc spoilers, I just outright do not have enough time to go and get relevant cutscene footage across the entire Trails series, even if I want to make content about it. So please bear with the B-roll that's going to consist of basically whatever places in the story of various games I happen to have a save file for. It is genuinely a blessing that both Kuro 2 and Reverie have randomly generated dungeons I can put video relevant party members in and run around with for as long as I need to get footage, because that's going to be doing a whole lot of heavy lifting right now. Anyway, let's talk about some Sept-Terrions, because I got theories about all three of the ones we have yet to see in the series. One of them is going to be exactly what the community is thinking. One of them is a meme that I think has a decent chance of being true. And the last one is, well, I think actually a legitimate theory that needed a little bit of thinking to come up with. So let's just quickly go over what we know about the ones we've seen already. There are 7 Sept-Terrions, according to teachings of the church, that are all powerful relics, one for each of the elements, bestowed upon the ancient Zemurian civilization by Eidos herself, that have been lost after said civilization's fall, and the Society of Ouroboros wants to uncover them and do something different with each one, as far as we can tell at this point in the series. In order, the ones we have encountered are, from the Wilburil arc, the Sept-Terrion of Space, the Shining Ring, the Oriole. This was Ouroboros' goal for the entire arc, and they did eventually successfully obtain it, albeit after getting Weissman killed, but I don't really think anyone in Ouroboros particularly cared about that part. In Crossbell, we kind of sort of encounter the Sept-Terrion of Mirage, but not the original one. That was the only Sept-Terrion we know to be sentient on its own, as each one does have a sacred beast overseeing it and a clan associated with it, but as far as we know, the original Mirage, the Hollow Phantasm Demiurgos, is the only one to possess free will on its own. Because of this personality, free will, and powers over causality, Demiurgos eventually deteriorated, and in order to stop it from hurting everyone, it destroyed itself. Though its associated clan, the Croix family of Crossbell, eventually did find a way to recreate it in the form of Kia Bannings, the Zero Child, or Sept-Terrion of Zero. Following Trails to Azure, of course, Kia willingly gave up most of her power, though since Mariabel Croix has now joined the society as an Anguis, it seems like the knowledge of how to create another artificial Sept-Terrion of Mirage does lie with them as well. In the Erebonia arc, we were exposed to 2 Sept-Terrions, though again, not in their original form. As a long time before the events of Trails of Cold Steel, the Sept-Terrion of Earth, the Great Sable Hammer Lost Zem, and the Sept-Terrion of Fire, the Crimson Vessel Arc Rouge, with powers over body and soul respectively, fought in the Osgiliath Basin in Erebonia. Their hollow shells eventually got ejected to opposite edges of the Empire, but the 2 Sept-Terrions themselves became fused into the Great One, the Sept-Terrion of Steel, which was then later subdivided into the 7 Divine Knights. Following the events of the Erebonia arc and all that stuff happening, the Great One itself is manifested, the rivalries happen, and it is eventually destroyed, freeing Erebonia from the curse. It seems like Ouroboros, as far as we know yet, didn't want anything to do specifically with these 2 Sept-Terrions and were only interested in the Great Twilight. This of course leaves 3 Sept-Terrions left, those of Water, Wind, and Time, and precedent dictates that we are very likely to see at least one more in the Calvard arc. The main premise of Trails Through Daybreak is helping Agnes discover lost orbments that all happen to look like pocket watches. Adding on to that, if you look at the game's Japanese logo, in addition to saying Kuro no Kiseki in kanji, it also says it in katakana. And if you ignore the kanji and just look at the title in katakana, things get really interesting. It's kind of a circular thing. The kanji used for Kuro has multiple different pronunciations, but because of the katakana, we know it's the one for Kuro, so the title of the game is one that loosely translates to Trails Through Daybreak. But without the kanji, the katakana could mean something different as well, and because of how written Japanese works, we don't know where the word break in that is. We just know that the title of the game is Kuro no Kiseki. So, let's take the katakana title of another very good JRPG, though this one is a lot older and a lot more famous, and if we compare things, we can see that Kuro no in the katakana writing of the game's title is exactly how the word chrono is written in Japanese, which means it could be Kuro no Kiseki, Trails Through Daybreak, but it could also be Kuro no Kiseki, which I don't think is grammatically accurate, but Chrono Trails. And there's actually a different combination of kanji that's pronounced Kiseki, but also means miracle. I believe the double meaning of Kiseki as a word was an intentional thing in naming the Trails series in the first place, though they specifically use the kanji that mean trails in the title of the games. So another name for Trails Through Daybreak could be Chrono Miracle. Before basically anything about the game was shown, the first piece of key art was Van holding one of the pocket watch-shaped orbments with Mare flying around, and with the title Kuro no Kiseki. So the immediate thing people jumped on was that Mare is the holy beast of time, and this arc will have to do with the Sept-Terrion of time somehow. Unfortunately, I can't say yes or no on that, not because of spoiler things, but because after 2 games, we don't know anything about the Sept-Terrion this arc is going to revolve around, so this does technically remain a theory, but there's also been nothing to disprove it, so I think that much evidence is enough to make me believe that we are going to be dealing at least with time in Calvard. The thing is, Calvard has been hyped up as the rival to Erebonia the entire time, and while its land area is smaller than Erebonia was at its peak, there's a decent chance Calvard is still big enough to have 2 Sept-Terrions, so it's possible that we're not just going to be dealing with time this arc. Can't really say anything about that, but I do have theories as to where wind and water are that do not involve Calvard. Also, if there is one in Calvard, which I'm going to assume there is, this is the map of the entire continent, and Calvard only gets like 2/3 of the way over to the eastern coast. There's also an archipelago to the south, a big peninsula to the north. It would be a little weird if more than 5 of the 7 Sept-Terrions were all in vaguely western Zemuria, so I'm more leaning on the idea that Calvard is just going to be about time, and the other 2 are going to be either south or east, just so there's some representation for everywhere in the continent by the end of the series. Let's talk about water next, just because this is relatively simple to explain, and I think leaving the meme theory for after the majority of people have already tuned out is probably for the best. I want to make my first actual Trails video in like 2 years, something that displays that I have actual knowledge on the series and I'm not just making jokes. In the latter half of the Cold Steel arc, we learn a little bit more about the state of things in eastern Zemuria, and that it's been undergoing rapid desertification in recent years, which has led to a lot of immigrants moving west, and is part of the immigrant-related issues that Calvard has been having. This is obviously touched on more in the Calvard arc itself, but we don't really need to learn more about the situation in the east to talk about the Sept-Terrion of Water, because if places that aren't supposed to be desert are becoming desert, that suggests some sort of an absence of water. Now, like everything else in the series, it could just be explained by bad things are happening to the septium veins, and something bad is going on with the state of the continent in general, and that's what Ouroboros is either working towards or working to stop. But I would like to believe that in the areas becoming desert was a civilization, which actually we do know there was a big civilization out east in the past, that revolved around the Sept-Terrion of Water, like how there were other civilizations around the continent and different clans related to the other Sept-Terrions that we've seen so far, and that something has happened to said Sept-Terrion of Water leading to its influence no longer being present in the land, and its natural gifts wearing out and the water starting to dry up, causing that desertification. The thing is, we don't really know exactly what Ouroboros has been doing elsewhere in the continent either. As of Cold Steel 4, there are 8 missing Enforcers and 3 missing Anguis that we haven't seen anything of whatsoever at any point in the series, and have just gotten basically a couple pieces of dialogue about 1 Anguis and 1 Enforcer from Sharon. So, what were those people doing the entire time? You can't even argue that all of those other guys were dealing with the plans that we've seen already, because the big piece of Ouroboros backup they got in the Great War we already know was Valter, who we have seen already. So, while it's most likely that a lot of the other people were working in the background with the plans we've seen already, I wouldn't be surprised if Ouroboros has actively been operating in the East for a while. Keep in mind, they've been around for over 2 decades to some degree, as of Sky 2nd chapter, I believe. And that lines up surprisingly well with the desertification starting. So there's a non-zero possibility that way at the beginning of Ouroboros, when it was, I guess, just the Grandmaster and McBurn, because we know he was also the first Enforcer, they already got the Sept-Terrion of Water, or at least did something to it to stop it acting on the continent, and we're just going to learn about that in retrospect way later when the story actually takes us out east. Or maybe it was disrupted by something else, and Ouroboros is going to want to get their hands on it, and they do want the desertification to stop. It doesn't matter. I think that something going wrong with Sept-Terrion of Water is the cause of the desertification, because it just kind of makes sense. As for Wind, unfortunately, I can't keep the memes contained any longer. We gotta go all out with this. And don't worry, there is actually a lore backing up for this that has to do with a kind of important piece of background information that is hidden behind an optional bonding event in Kuro 2 for some ungodly reason. One of the party members in the Calvard arc is Farida Al-Fayed, who is this arc's child soldier, and because Fee was 15 in Cold Steel 1, we have to one-up it, and she starts out Kuro 1 at 13. Her core is the Kurga, which is basically just the warriors of a specific ethnic group in the Middle East of Zemuria. They have their own village and traditions that you get to learn a lot about the more you get to know Fairy throughout the arc. A few of their traditions and some of their backstory is very interesting. First important thing is they do worship the goddess, except like a lot of the Middle Eastern Zemurian cultures, they refer to her as Alusha or Arusha instead of Adios. It is explicit that this is the exact same goddess worshipped in all of the countries we've seen so far. In fact, you can even go to a Middle Eastern style church in the capital of Calvard in the Kuro games, and it's virtually identical to one of the more traditional Western Zemurian ones. It plays the same song, they use the same symbolism to represent like the different Sept-Terrion and stuff like that. They literally just have a slightly different aesthetic and call the goddess something different. So they are very religious with the same Septian church. They also are dedicated to fire. They will often utter things about the flame and Arusha in the same sentence as though they're both very important things to them. This might sound slightly similar to a party member from a specific ethnic group who is associated with the church in a previous arc. And that association was actually intentional. In one of her Kuro 2 bonding events, Fairy will mention a tradition that the people of Nord and the Kurga clan are actually sister clans, and that the Nord group originated in the Middle East of Zemuria and moved there for whatever reason. So, Gaius, the Dominion from Nord, who also worships the wind in addition to the goddess, has a connection to Fairy, who is not a Dominion and is not likely to actually become one at any point in this arc, but worships the flame and the goddess. And yet, the Sept-Terrion whose husk was found in Nord was the Sept-Terrion of Earth, and not the Sept-Terrion of Wind. But if the Nord clan came from the same place the Kurga clan did initially, where could they have gotten their worship of the wind from? Perhaps it would be ironic if the Wind Sept-Terrion was the one in the Middle East, and that's where the people of Nord got that whole tradition from. The only thing that arises here is, okay, then where did the Kurga clan get their worship of fire from? I don't really know about that, this would be even funnier and more ironic if it was the Sept-Terrion of Fire, Arc Rouge, whose husk was found in Nord, and then Lost Zem Earth was over in Brionia Island, but unfortunately it is reversed. You could make an argument that they were facing the opposite direction when they attacked each other, and maybe Arc Rouge was originally from Eastern Zemuria or closer to Nord, and they just got turned around when they were fighting, but I don't think that's going to hold up in court. So it's more just like one level of irony for Gaius, and not two levels of irony where the two groups swapped Sept-Terrions at some point. I'm also a fan of this distribution because it does kind of spread the last three Sept-Terrions out to a pretty big distance, because if you look at it on the map of Zemuria, it turns out that where Lost Zem ended up and Crossbell is actually kind of really close. At the very least, where the Liber Arc and the Oriole were the entire time is pretty equidistant from both of the two Erebonian Sept-Terrions, but if the time one is anywhere on the western half of Calvard, then that's going to be three pretty closely bunched together. So I like the idea of outside of Calvard there being two more Sept-Terrions that are in geographical areas of the continent we knew existed from the beginning, but haven't gotten a lot of attention paid to them directly, so them being there would force the series to at least visit to some degree. So I like the idea of forcing there to be at least one game in the Middle East and one in the Far East at some point. Now, does this leave the big northern peninsula kind of completely left alone? No, because two very important things are there. Laman State, the headquarters of the Bracer Guild, and Arteria, the headquarters of the church. And it might just be the Kevin coming back copium talking, but I kind of feel like locations in that area are going to be very relevant by the end of the series. Like, all the Dominions are probably going to get mobilized at some point, and there are 3 S-rank bracers we know absolutely nothing about right now, and since the Far East seems to be becoming less populous, there's not likely to be many over there, so since we know there really aren't any anywhere west of Crossbell, there's a good chance there's a couple in Laman HQ as well, so that region of the continent has a lot of stuff going for it where it can easily be relevant for the endgame of the series without the Sept-Terrions needing to be involved. So I feel like spreading the remaining 3 out amongst the current arc and places that people have been wanting to visit for a very long time is also just good storytelling and a good way of extending the series in a way that fans won't be angry about. But yeah, to summarize, I believe the Sept-Terrion of Time is hidden somewhere in Calvard and will be relevant for Kuro Final Chapter, or most likely the last 2 Kuro games because I know how Falcom works. The Sept-Terrion of Wind is going to be in the Middle East somewhere, most likely associated with the Kurga clan village and their traditions. We don't exactly know how big the Middle East is, or even if the Kurga village is in one of the 2 Middle Eastern countries we know about so far. So there's a pretty wide swath of the continent that could be, but I think it would be around there somewhere. And the Sept-Terrion of Water is somewhere in the east of the continent. The eastern bit of Zemuria appears to be inspired by the Chinese coastline with a few islands that vaguely represent Japan as well. I am personally going to say that it's going to be in the east, but not all the way in the east. So not on the eastern coast or on the Japani islands, but a bit further west into more of a central China inspired area, because it seems like that's where the big civilization out there was based out of, and it would make sense for one of those to be around a Sept-Terrion. And if the entire area is getting deserty, then it would make sense to eventually have to spelunk in the ruins of said civilization to find out what happened to the Sept-Terrion of Water. But yeah, we got Trails content on the channel now. As long as this doesn't do completely awfully, there will be more. So I think I'm going to end this here. Until next time though, this is Luxon, signing off.